Hey everyone, we're going to continue talking about the post-World War II international events that we've been seeing so far during these early years of the Cold War. And we're going to start by looking at two alliances, two teams of countries that will come together in this new Cold War. The first alliance is called NATO, and as you see, these blue countries are going to be the NATO countries. So what NATO stands for is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. The other countries that you see in red are going to be an alliance called the Warsaw Pact. Let's start with NATO, though. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, is a Western alliance of non-communist countries. So West being the left on this map, the left side of this map, and East being the right side, we see that most of these blue countries, most of these NATO countries are towards the Western side. And all of these countries are non-communist. They, for the most part, believe in capitalism, where people make their own economic decisions, where they have democracy and elected officials. So, like we had said, these countries that you see up here that are part of NATO, that are part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, are the United States, are Canada, are Western European countries like France, Great Britain, Spain, Italy, so on, West Germany, which we've talked about. So the goal of NATO is to collectively, is together, protect against the Soviet Union, protect against a potential attack by the Soviet Union in case this Cold War, where there's no fighting, becomes a hot war where there is fighting, and for the most part, the goal is to prevent the Soviet Union from further spreading communism into Europe, this way, changing their countries into communist countries. So this is one side of the Cold War. The other side is going to be the Warsaw Pact. And we see that these countries are on the eastern side of this map that we see. So this is an alliance of basically the Soviet Union and what we call satellite nations, or these Eastern European buffer countries. They're really used to protect the Soviet Union from Western Europe, from NATO, from these countries that are non-communists that might want to attack the Soviet Union. So whereas NATO was afraid that the Soviet Union in the Warsaw Pact might attack them, the Warsaw Pact is also afraid of that. They're afraid that the Western countries, that Great Britain, France, Spain, Italy, the United States, Canada, might attack them. So they're literally going to use what we call satellite nations to shield themselves from attack. So if NATO wants to go into the Soviet Union, they'll have to go through all these countries first. So they'll try to take up as many of these Eastern European countries as they can to protect against those Western attacks, protect against NATO attacks, in case this Cold War ever became a hot war where fighting actually happens. So these are our two teams, the non-communist NATO and then the communist Warsaw Pact, fighting against each other, competing against each other ideologically in terms of whose system will be the best. Will it be a non-communist system or a communist system? So here we're looking in a little closer. We see just the Europe and Asian parts of the world. We don't see the United States and Canada here, which makes the Warsaw Pact look really big, since the Soviet Union, Russia, was the largest country on Earth. But we get a better look at these satellite nations right here, the ones that are really used as a buffer, as a shield to protect against the NATO countries. So the goal, like we said, was for the Soviet Union to spread communism. And where they're going to spread communism first, where they're going to try to spread communism, is to the countries of Greece and Turkey that you see here. So our president at this time, the U.S. president, President Truman, says that this cannot happen, that they cannot continue to spread communism throughout the world. So he decides that the United States would send military aid and economic aid to these countries to help them rebuild from after World War II, help their economy stabilize by sending them money, by sending them economic aid, help send them military aid to protect against radicals that might want to change the governments into a communist country. So the goal here was really to stop communism. And what Truman is going to call this event that happens here, this belief system that happens here, is the Truman Doctrine. So the Truman Doctrine is simply everything we've said right now. In other words, the Truman policy, is what the Truman Doctrine means. What it just means is we will stop communism from spreading to these two countries, Greece and Turkey. So send them money, send them economic aid, send the U.S. military to help protect against a change in government that might result in communism, and stop these countries, for the most part, from becoming communist, and use economic and military aid to do that. That is the Truman Doctrine. Make sure you know it. So out of this Truman Doctrine, and again, I know I've said it a lot already, economic and military aid to Greece and Turkey, stop them from being communist. Out of this Truman Doctrine comes two new ideas that are going to shape pretty much the next 2 decades, potentially even 3 decades in U.S. history. So out of this Truman Doctrine, this idea to stop communism from spreading to Greece and Turkey, comes this new policy towards communism called the Policy of Containment. And we see the word contain here, try to stop something from spreading, like a container. So in a sense, the United States says we need to put communism in a jar and seal that jar tight. Stop communism from spreading. This is the policy of containment. This is what the United States is going to do. They are not going to go after and stop communism where it exists. The United States is not going to aim to go after the Soviet Union or those satellite nations that have communism, but stop it from spreading into Europe any further. This is the new policy the United States has towards communism. Don't be aggressive in eliminating it, but stop it from spreading. Contain it. Throw it in the container wherever it exists. Don't let it go anywhere else. So this all comes from this initial idea from the Truman Doctrine to stop communism from spreading to Greece and Turkey. But now it's not just Greece and Turkey. It's pretty much everywhere in Europe. And we'll see after China becomes communist, it will apply in Asia as well. Another idea that comes out of the Truman Doctrine is the Marshall Plan. So the Marshall Plan is going to take the economic ideas of helping Greece and Turkey rebuild and have money and make them more resistant towards communism by doing the same thing, but everywhere in Europe for the most part. So let's look at what happened. It says 2 years after World War II, basically, this city is still going to reflect the destruction of urban centers during wartime bombing. So 1947, 2 years after World War II, you still see destruction all over this city in Europe. So the Marshall Plan is going to be created in 1948 by the United States, which is going to help fund this city and help rebuild this city. And now look at it. It looks a lot better. You don't see all these remnants of bombings and decrepit buildings all over the place. It's rebuilt. It's nice. It's wonderful. So this is before the Marshall Plan. This is after the Marshall Plan. What the Marshall Plan is going to do is send money, send that economic aid part of the Truman Doctrine that we had talked about with Greece and Turkey, but help all of Western Europe rebuild from after World War II. This will help prevent communism from spreading. Communism spreads when countries are in economic turmoil, where conditions aren't very good. So the best thing the United States think they can do for Europe to stop communism from spreading is help them rebuild, help them do well economically, help their economies increase, give them lots of money. And that's exactly what happens. They're going to give over $13 billion to Europe to help them rebuild. Here is Hamburg, a German city in 1947. Here it is after. in 1952 after the Marshall Plan. Again, the US is sending money, sending economic aid, help these countries rebuild and resist communism after World War II. And both of these plans, the policy of containment, stop them from spreading no matter what, stop communism from spreading no matter what, and the Marshall Plan, give these countries lots of money to rebuild, make them more resistant to communism, are going to be very effective and are going to really shape the military policy, the international policy in the 1950s and 60s. Hope you learned something today, guys. Thank you.